This was going to be nothing but a Facebook post. In fact, there was no intention here to begin with. It was just play. But the play led me somewhere interesting, in my mind at least. Interesting to who and what I kind of am and have been. So, let's start with the initial play. Terms, words, things like that just flow through my mind. And I come to ideas, that sound neat. And I'm like, oh, let's Google that. Like something like SpongeBob porn. I'm like, ooh, that sounds cool. I bet you there is some. Well, almost always, right? If you're looking for some kind of porn. But honestly, almost everything that you look for, term-wise, that sounds kind of playful or something, somebody has done something for on the interwebs. The one that came to mind for me, for some reason, I don't remember why, but the term surreal fired me off. I heard somebody speaking that on a video. And I thought about, what about Surreal Team 6? And, came up with, so I Googled it, figuring there would be something in the world, and there probably is nowadays. Google, the way SEOs work and everything, Google is fucking, or I said SOEs, I don't know. It no longer shows you the most likely, the thing that most matches what you've got. So it may have been around for quite a while. And stuff that ages disappears off their search lists and everything. Search doesn't give the results it used to. So it may not be that I am so clever that I came up with this thing nobody else came up with. And then I started, I think it's a cool idea, and I started musing what would it mean, which was interesting enough. But from that little playful thing, after I put that down, my mind engaged to, I wonder if there's surrealistic philosophy. Because that sounds really interesting. Okay. Now, my history of philosophy, where I really, I've got a degree in this shit, right? But my interest in it pretty much ends in the Scholastic period. That's, your classical philosophers, I find many of them very, very interesting. They seem to be struggling with the kind of problems. As you start getting into early modern philosophy, I feel like they're just getting so dull, right? They're not trying to answer the same big questions. Now, there are some later philosophers like Hume that I really do enjoy, at least their ideas. I don't really enjoy reading philosophy, but I like getting a capture of their idea and working with it and playing with it. So there's some later philosophy that I'm interested in, but I am generally not interested in more modern views of philosophy. So I search it, and all I find there is really philosophies of the artistic style. Well, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for actual surrealism. But I think to myself, okay, what sounds like that I'm familiar with as a philosophical term? And it's absurdism. Now, I don't really study absurdism. There's people who comment on my philosophical stuff and say things like, "You really should read Camus," and I'm kind of like, you don't know about that. But I end up Googling absurdist philosophy to see if it's close to what I'm thinking of. It's not, but it leads me in the right direction. Because at least, and again, I have not studied absurdist philosophy at all, but sounds kind of like surreal, right? And and I always loved the quote, "I believe because it's absurd," which is a scholastic, but I can't remember who. Anyway, it was the argument for God. Was that reality is it's sort of the opposite to the Thomist view, and was very appealing to me in a lot of ways. That the fact, anyway, as almost a refutation of a sensible God, which I find beautiful because everything everything the Judeo-Christian, especially the Old Testament, but when you combine it with the New, you end up with this. Oh my God, this is like some psychotic creature. Like, this is so much worse than Zeus. Zeus at least has kind of more human attitudes and is less of a dictator than the Old Testament Yahweh. And now, then you have like Jesus who's like, and you're all forgiven. Except you damn money changers. Like, what the fuck? It's like this almost bipolar. This is the thing. The Old Testament God is just pure evil. The God that is revealed through the New Testament feels bipolar, like really, really horrible, and maybe worse than the evil God. It's like, because they're trying to reconcile just how fucking evil that Old Testament God is with this God of love, and it's like, oh my God, how awful! How can anyone read this and not oppose it at every level? I mean, the Old Testament God is easy enough to oppose. Anyway, we're getting way offline here, except that religion is what aligns best under absurdism to what I'm talking about as a surrealistic philosophy. The little notes, again, from what I can extract. Oh, there's a pickle jar lid under my stove. Interesting. The little blurb that I read on absurdism and particularly on Camus' writing, he's anti-suicide, which I of course am not, but he expresses, but I'm also incapable of it, which means I must find another escape, right? He expresses two kinds of suicide. Sort of a physical suicide, and then a philosophical suicide. And the philosophical suicide aligns almost entirely with like religious ideals and stuff like that. And honestly, if you take it further than I think he's taking it, with ideas like human community and stuff, because that's where religious ideals are based on. But I'm someone who's essentially isolationist when it comes to other humans. I mean, not 100%, right? But then when I start thinking, what would it mean when you start taking the ideas of surrealistic art and apply them to the basis of philosophy? It's a rejection of the realism. And in a way, absurdism is a rejection of realism, but in a different sort of way. But I start thinking, rather than following the religions of others that are built to appeal to congregations of humans or whatever, it's quite possible what I'm thinking of as surrealist philosophy would be the paving of your own reality, the creation of your own reality to live in, to exist in. Now this is kind of intriguing because in a lot of ways this is what I've done at various times throughout my life. And in some sense, it's been the underlying fundamental of my existence, is that if there's any belief in me, it's this sort of amorphous thing that doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense, okay? It's, you know, it's like I'll go outside and the world will shift and things will change, and it's almost like delusions. Delusions is probably the best word for it. When I look at things under the rational microscope of what reality is like, I say, well, it's my mind playing tricks on me. It's things that I don't really believe. But I want to believe them more than I actually can. So something like I walk a certain path and a building that I expect is no longer there. And I often express this with all seriousness, the building has disappeared. And then some later time I walk down that path and the building is there. Now, what are the possible explanations for this? One is the very naive or whatever, unrealistic belief that object permanence and reality aren't quite what they seem. There are rifts, there are tears, I may be slipping dimensions, all kinds of different things that might be happening. And those excite me. They energize me. When I see something like that, when something so very wrong doesn't fit into the reality, the dullness of the non-surreal reality, the mundane existence where one is expected to be able to do things that I'm essentially not really capable of doing very well. All these things they bring a certain life and energy to me. Now, I get a certain energy from just thinking about subject matters, etc. when I'm walking. Walking is mainly the energizer here. But it's so much richer when I'm living in this world that I know can't be real, right? When I know it's no longer, I'm no longer fitting the reality. And when something really odd happens, and it doesn't have to be, let's use a word that's different from odd. When something mystical happens, and it doesn't have to be something that is unexplainable or anything like that. In fact, one of the most unexplainable things that happened to me, which was a UFO that I saw with my family and a bunch of other people at a fairly young age, I don't feel any of that towards that. I don't feel any of that draw towards that. That felt like it was just plain old boring reality. But these other facets are like I said, kind of energizing. I feel this like I'm going beyond and into an exalted state, much as I do when I'm dancing, by experiencing these things. And some of them, again, there's nothing weird about them, nothing unexplainable, nothing that contradicts reality to any sense, but sometimes they still have this mystical overlay. For example, there was an encounter I had, just a couple of words back and forth between me and someone else. And it's happened more than once with different people, just strangers, where it feels like something is hinted at in those words that's a lot more and a lot deeper than the reality, than what the conversation would seem to imply or whatever. And the energy, that excitement, whatever, is kind of similar to the feeling that you get when you're falling in love. It really is. It's almost like the same kind of pathways are being engaged in terms of this is so impossible, improbable, whatever, but I must. It's almost vital that I believe that this is real, that this is beyond, again, the mundane. It is not an easy path to take, though. It was a lot easier when I was younger to just set out on a walk and experience at least some level of the mystical there. Although different forms of it have been available to me more recently. So one is Cobs. And they started out much like this investigation with a playful joke, right? Cobs are the things that make cobwebs. Well, my wife told me, no, cobwebs are the remains of spider webs. And I'm like, no. Cobs are the spirits of spiders and they create cobwebs. So it's the remains of the spider creating. And so that kind of playful attitude got into something. Now, I don't actually think the term Cobs it comes from that. But what it really refers to is these visual glitches that I get, or was getting. And it's funny, I only got them after I moved here, not to this house, but to Eugene in general again. And they would be almost like a shadow sliding across the floor or through the air or something like that. And sometimes that shadow would be a light shadow. It would be pale colored rather than dark. And sometimes it's explainable. Sometimes I see like a gray squirrel and say, you're not a cob, you were actually a squirrel. But quite often, I can come to no explanation, and I'm talking none whatsoever, like lighting and whatnot. I look at the shadow play and whatever, and none of it makes any sense. And sometimes they get very large, like I saw a cob the size of a bear jump into the river. Didn't splash, didn't do anything like that. I actually have seen a few such large ones. And again, I think that's just, the processing. Okay, let's take Mr. Rational here, right? The processing involved in my eyesight is so fucked up, right, that it's very easy to explain away these kind of problems. I know how bad my eyesight actually is and what happens to my brain, and the fact that these glasses change things means that my brain, when I take off the glasses, put them on, whatever, my brain has to go through these gymnastics that once those pathways in the neurons are burnt in, they're going to cause problems of this nature possibly. Okay. But so what? So what? You think the reality that we see is anything like the reality that's actually there? Our vision processing is already doing all this weird crap and giving us an interpretation that works, that helps us. So why don't I diverge? and live in a different reality. One that accommodates both my vision issues, but also my other mental facilities better, that matches to them better, that makes me happier, more energized, whatever, than the kind of reality that actually exists. And now, I feel like when I was in my teens, I was much, much closer to making this, right? And I figured, at some point, I'm going to make the breakthrough. At that time, I thought I could shift into a different world set entirely, okay? I had a few different thoughts about it. One was, all reality would just shift according to my whim. That one I didn't believe in too much, but that's the one I kind of wanted. But another was that, and this is kind of more fundamental to the absurdist view, is you can change the world around you to suit your needs. You can do things, you can get yourself a new car, whatever. Things that make your life easier, happier, whatever. Or you can change your viewpoint. And these were kind of conflicting ideas, right? I will be okay with being poor. I will be okay with living on the street. Whatever happens there. I will be accepting of it. And more than that, enjoy it. Because fundamentally, I can't enjoy fucking anything, right? Like, that's the core problem. But that's not entirely true. I do know something that I can enjoy. I can enjoy slipping into that unreality. Now, is this a path that can be taught that others might find any value to? I don't know. Do I care? Again, I don't know. You know, my drumming was a way for me to create stories and to watch them in real time. And again, that's slipped away over time. So much of the things that I enjoy, the only time that I think that I'm truly released and have the kind of pleasure, and maybe deeper, that I once had is when I'm dancing. I don't even know if it's pleasure, it's just, it's an exalted state. I'm out of this reality and in something different. And that different is what I have to seek. And whether it's just a delusion or something that it doesn't matter. It honestly doesn't matter. And that's the argument for religion, right? If it makes you happier, why does it matter? I think that there is a possibility to have parallel philosophies here. And, you know, the kind of philosophy that allows you to say, do the evils that religion has inflicted on the world. Those are, you can't just base on one viewpoint. You have to be able to shift your observation point. And that's what I've been doing my whole life, right? You know, I look at these beliefs that I seem to have that I know are wrong from the rationalist point of view, but then I want them to be right, and I'm willing for them to be right. if I can make that switch, I can also make the switch that I don't want, I'm not willing to let myself, and there's no desire in this path or whatever, but I'm not willing to let myself, say, go out and murder people because that's what my philosophy leads to, or something along that line. And honestly, my most realistic philosophy actually doesn't go to murder, but it does say that the ultimate good, and this is mostly derived from scientific acceptable theories and whatnot, but that the great good has to be the heat death of the universe. Well, that's pretty fucking bleak, but that's the end state. If there's any purpose, that's what it's intended to be. Or else it's just the canvas is the ultimate good. And none of those are particularly helpful when you get to an individual philosophy. So why don't I just change them? Why don't I change the world? And make it one that is so fantastical and astounding that I don't have to worry about the underlying questions behind why is it there, what is it, and rather can just actually enjoy something I can't, and that may be an intrinsic flaw to me, I can't do with this reality, for the most part. For the most part. I can sit and... So when I'm not in that exalted state, the enjoyment can be a very melancholy sort of thing. Like noticing the beauty and the transience of something, realizing the two at once, and almost being devastated by that combination. But here's the difference. That exalted state, it feels like it's forever when it's happening. It feels like it's transcended time. And that is the thing that I must have, is forever. Not forever to live, but that every moment, so this is different. So that everything that is good must be always. And everything that is always is almost inherently good. It doesn't matter because you will get used to it and you will accept it and it will be okay. But if I can bring my life to living moments, not as the moment, not in the moment, in the forever, that position of that exalted position where there's no good or bad. With the dancing, there's lights, there's color, there's sound, there's this swirling chaos of existence. But it feels like forever in a moment. And each moment becomes its own forever. And the mind is gone, completely gone. The alcohol helps with that. But everything else does too. I mean, just drinking doesn't do it. not by a long shot. It's this whole... And sometimes I think I can reach that under other circumstances. The dancing takes me the furthest on that path. But the question is how to reach it always. Now, if you look at an idea like divergent realities, multiverse, split universes, whatever, every choice point breaks out into different pathways. If you look at something like that, I don't know how helpful that is, right? Because the conscious existence that I am actually in most of the time, the stream that I live through, is mostly not these transcendent, exalted moments, right? Instead, it's the misery of reality with maybe tiny, tiny hints of remembering what it can be like. What it can be like where there's no good or bad, where there's no defined substances, where it's all just a blur. But that blur itself is just so self-fulfilling. And again, that can sound crazy. I mean, it probably is. I probably am. The only way I can express to humans is by slipping out of that. Like, when I'm in that state, I am in no position to give any of the information from it. And the connection of that kind of state and my normal day-to-day reality, any attempt to bridge those feels like, it feels almost as difficult as trying to bring the words out to you. Like, I don't have that grasp anymore. But I think that reaching that kind of state is of value. Now, how does this fit into the surrealism? Well, because of the pure mutability of the reality that's within those exalted states, because time stops being what it is in our reality, objects stop really being, and you can scrape up close to it, and scraping close to it can be exhilarating as well. You don't have to make it the whole way to get something out of it. But I think the goal is to make it that whole way and to take the divergent path that leads into that, where you don't come out of it anymore. And that would be more than a philosophical death at that point. You would no longer be functioning in any reasonable way. I think, unless there's sort of an autopilot or something. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe the autopilot is what I have to suffer through all the time. Maybe that's where my consciousness sits most of the time. And there's part of me that's out there having a great time, firing off these things, but I just don't feel it because I'm in charge of this stupid maintenance mode. I don't know. I don't know if any of this makes a fucking bit of sense to anyone. I don't know if it makes sense to me. But that's why it's surrealist philosophy, isn't it?